Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Billy Hamilton-Stent. I'm the Client Strategy Director of Octopus Group, and I'm going to do the data bit of the day. I think we should probably start with a very quick survey before we go into our data. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is really bad and 10 is really good, I would like everyone in the room who thinks their day is going 7+ to raise their hands, please. Okay, and everyone who thinks it's going maybe 4 and below? Okay, so there's a glass of wine for the gentleman at the back there. It's good to know your audience a little, isn't it? If we get a mean average of below 5, we just shut the doors and do something else. Also, just as a quick question as well, who here has children? Who has a family? Who has a family where the children are under 5? 5 and under. Okay, so that's me too. So I read something the other day that if you have children under 5, you are more likely to suffer from short-term memory loss than at any other point in your life, due to sleep deprivation and all the other gubbins that goes with having kids. So we try and be really simple here and know that after about 6 or 7 minutes, I might be losing some of you to that attention span. And actually, simplicity is a really important theme of the data. So trying to be simple and simplify what we do from a marketing and communications point of view. Who thinks the company they work for overcomplicates what they do when they talk about it? Yeah, okay. Good, so that's an important mantra for some of the things we're going to talk about. John's already spoken a little bit to this. This is the sample. It's the boring but essential part of any research presentation. This is the group of stakeholders that we've spoken to, our core of IT people, which have formed the basis of our research for the last 4 years. This is now 4 years old, this study. And a mix of the folks that are business function flavoured, finance, HR, sales, marketing, and of course board level folks. So you get a sense of that. We'll delve into that in a little more detail in a second. So what is a tech head as well? Just to underline the comment that John made about technology and what it's doing to the B2B world, really. This is just some grab statements and some grab stats from the survey. But if you look at how technology works within the audience, the sample that we've gone to, 80% say it's increasingly important that they know more about technology in order to make decisions about buyers and suppliers, which is you guys, that you are the suppliers of the people that we've spoken to. 77% increasingly more important to know more about technology in order to do their job. So we know people are very tech savvy and self-educated. Everyone's using social media to a greater or lesser degree. There's a whole presentation we can do about that, but just to set some context that people are utilising that technology in a communications context. And also quite interestingly, so B2B buyers are savvy. We asked a question about 91% of buyers are aware of the practice of paid and placed information. And opinions by vendors and suppliers. So they know when they're being kind of sold to. And actually in the data, it's actually in the book, you'll see that most of them don't mind either, as long as it's the right kind of sales pitch. So you've got a sophisticated buyer who's very technology literate. That's a tech head. So there are, the main title of this research is the content pinch point. So what is the pinch point? So I'll say this more than once during the course of the next 20 minutes. The pinch point is quite simple. It's the fact that the time people have to consume information is getting shorter. The devices they consume that on are getting smaller. The sales decision-making process is getting longer, and the appetite to consume information around that process is growing. Okay? So if you put all that together, trust me, that's a pinch. It will become clearer as we go through. But shorter, smaller, longer, and bigger. Those are the axes around which we'll talk. Let's have a look at shorter for a second. So this is 2013, 14, and 15. The last 3 years we've asked this question about how much time do you spend researching product suppliers and services online, and how much time do you spend following industry news and developments. The red line is the industry news and developments. The blue line is the more kind of business focus, searching for suppliers, etc. So last year I stood in a room and told people that what was happening was there was this huge increase in the consumption of information around your buyers. 21% from 3.5. These are just mean averages, about 3 hours 40 minutes up to 4.5 hours a week that people are doing this stuff. And we even said then that that's great. We can get very excited about it, but at some point that's going to peak. And have we reached peak time? Because this year, boo hiss, it's gone down a little. Okay, so the average, like for like on that IT group, is that people are spending a little bit less time consuming the information they were last year. Technically, if you're in the world of marketing and communications, that means that your world just got a tiny little bit smaller than last year. And if that's an ongoing trend, and time will only tell, that's something we need to consider. We also ask people about decisions around buying. So this chart shows us that, when people are asked, are they taking longer or the same time or less time to make buying decisions around suppliers and buyers, 46% say that it's increasing. 26% say it's decreasing. So you are twice as likely to be seeing a longer decision-making process around buying than you are for it to be contracting. Okay, that makes sense? So this is about the buying cycle getting longer. That cycle is actually, as an average, this is a number if you want it, 14 weeks. So it's in the book you have your disposal when you leave, but it's around 14 weeks for that process to take place, but it's getting longer. So less time to look at stuff, more time to make decisions. Those are two key elements of the trends in the data. Also, with these extended decision cycles, 83% of buyers say they shortlist or decide on a supplier before they're making contact with them at least half of the time. So this is fairly familiar territory, I guess, for some of you. People do a lot of hunting around before they make contact with you, making that whole content and communications piece, that what we might call top of the funnel experience, critically important, because the vast majority of people are operating in that way. And you'll see here that when we've asked, compared to 12 months ago, do you digest more information via the media through the following formats? You'll see that obviously the smartphone, tablet and laptop are our top three. That's a 50% increase, or 50% of people have said they've increased the amount of time they spend consuming information through their smartphone. Who commutes to work here? Okay, it's like a shrine to the smartphone, isn't it, the train? My train is anyway. So that's not new either, is it? But I guess we know that smartphones are quite important, and who has developed something or had that, the term responsive website mentioned to them over the last 12 months about the need to make sure things are mobile friendly. So I guess that's a no-no. It is interesting, though, that some of this information won't be brand new to you, but it's perhaps the context within which we give you the information that might change your thinking. And actually, that's our goal today, is to give you some information that helps you to, be more effective from a planning and execution point of view in 2016. So sometimes we know things, we get told them a lot, but we don't always action them. I was in the dentist on Monday, and he told me that I should floss my teeth more. It's a little personal detail, that's as far as I'm going. But I'm 43 next month, and he's not the first dentist to tell me that. So it's not new information. However, he contextualized it in this way. He said that, the longer you keep your teeth, the longer you live. There is a causal correlation between having molars and living longer. And it's to do with the fact that you can chew your food more effectively, and chewing your food really effectively extends your lifespan. So once I realized it wasn't just about, literally a hygiene point, I was on the floss bus. So my bathroom now is a shrine to flossing. The point is the context changes and we make different decisions. Just some very kind of highlight stats here about the nature of the content that people are consuming. So the top destination, in what ways do you generally prefer to find out about products, services and suppliers, is your website. Okay, we invest all this time in influencing people out there in the wild and hoping they come to www.mybusiness.com. Actually, it's a real go-to place, and in every study we do, the website is top, which is great if you've got lots of people coming. But of course, if you're not doing the right things on that website, it can be a blessing and a curse in equal measure. But nevertheless, website's top. Top social media, where do they go on social to find out about things? LinkedIn. PPC conversations around which channel should we, throw our money at. For us and our clients tend to aggregate around LinkedIn, and we've had some really great successes in that area. Top content is business-led. That is as opposed to product-led or opinion-led information. So people like to read about business. So if you think about that, your website, social media, business-led, you kind of get an idea for the flavour of information that these respondents consider to be most relevant when looking to onboard suppliers. So this increased appetite for content, 57% of respondents rely more on content to inform purchase decisions than they did a year ago. This is our appetite for content going up in our pinch point. And information gathering influences supplier shortlisting 93% of the time. Okay, and I think it's really important to kind of think on these stats, because sometimes I know at the other end of the spectrum where we're actually trying to get people to behave in a way so that they do buy from us, it can feel like no one's listening and no one's watching. You know, we've been in those situations, I'm sure. But this definitely, you know, defines and clarifies that there's a huge amount of appetite to get underneath the business and understand them more, which is, you know, part of the job of marketing, to make sure that experience is appropriate. So, the purchasing pinch point. Time is shorter, formats are smaller, cycles are longer, appetite is stronger. That's a scenario we're dealing with. Okay, that's what our data tells us. Those are the trends in our data. So what should we do about that? Well, want to have a question? I'd like to ask Master Yoda. And thought about this we have, because it's our job as a consultancy to come up with answers to those trends and those scenarios, isn't it? So what I'd like for you to consider in our pinch point, where time is shorter, devices are smaller, decision-making processes are longer, and appetite is bigger. What should we do about that? Well, let's reverse it for a second. Okay, let's just leave ourselves with a very small experiment where, what would it be like if time was longer? We had loads of time. Formats were larger. We were carrying around these great, hulking, great screens that we would stare at. Or perhaps maybe Google Glasses was able to project a panoramic view of what we were about to experience in front of us. That the decision-making was shorter and the appetite was weaker. Okay, let's just imagine that back to front. And if we come to a conclusion there, we can see that what we want to do is be as far away from that as possible. Okay, because what's happening is the opposite to this scenario. I'm not going to ask you to think on that too much more, but we will come back to it at the end of the deck. Before we do, I just want to touch a little bit on customer knowledge, because it's something that we kind of hold dear in our agency. If we know more about the people who you're trying to sell to, we can be better at advising you and building campaigns that are going to help you sell to them. Serious Decisions, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, said only last month that 60% of B2B organisations admit they don't really understand their buyers. Okay. 80% of IT decisions will be made by non-IT professionals by 2020, say Gartner. So what we've got is a lot of change in the kind of buying landscape. And maybe even could I just have a show of hands if that resonates with you, if you've seen the nature of your customer base, the people you're prospecting to, change over the last 12 or 24 months, and you're having to adapt marketing to that. Is that the case? There's some nodding heads, yeah. Good. So trouble is we kind of default to not listening to customers and default to kind of listening to the organisation, especially in large organisations, and it can cause some real problems, you know. And we place a lot of value in getting to know customers and getting to know prospects, so that we're doing what we're trying to do, which is very real, which is generate, you know, revenue and leads for businesses, is grounded in some, you know, kind of rational basis, really. And so just to demonstrate that, here is just, sorry, it's a little bit busy, this slide, but this is just within our own survey, the variance on some of these customers in some really simple things, okay, which is the time they take to do the things we talked about at the top of the presentation, which is to consume information, whether or not their budgets are going up this year or not at departmental level, and how long that decision-making process takes. We said it was an average of 14 weeks, okay. So this is by no means detailed analysis. This is just a snapshot of our data. But you can see this huge variance. You know, if you're starting to talk to the HR function, it lives in a very, very different world to the IT function. If you're talking at a board level, that is a very different world to very senior decision makers in other parts of the business. And so you could see just at a glance that you would start to consider that certain ways and approaches of connecting with those people might change subject to that. And so that's part of understanding the audience, and that's not about segments. It's not about, you know, segmenting your data. It's about literally understanding your buyer and being more effective at communicating with them. So on the basis that there is variance in that customer base, it's a really interesting finding that came out of the survey. We put some statements into the research about what the nature of kind of digital marketing really is doing from a buyer perspective. the statement here is, online content levels the playing field for customer engagement between challenger brands and large businesses. So 60% of our respondents agreed with that, 40% were neutral or disagreed. Actually, very few disagreed. Interesting that the board level, it's higher, okay? So the board level is a greater proponent of that than the average respondents in the sample. But we see that the playing field is leveled. And above and beyond customer, the thing we also kind of forget about when we're into planning mode is the competition, okay? Not so much in the fact that we don't know who they are and they're talked about on a day-to-day basis within our businesses, that's obvious. But we tend to think that the way that we are going about attracting customers and engaging with them is unique to us, that the tools we use are unique to us. That we've got some kind of advantage because we might be ahead in some way from a technology point of view or from a thinking perspective. It's rarely the case, Everyone knows, and you're sold to, okay? You're sold to as buyers. You know that it's very hard to differentiate from in the market. And so this is interesting that it's starting to play out, that I think what buyers are seeing is a leveler playing field between those large and small businesses. Equally, digital marketing enables business to punch above their weight when competing for buyers' attention. So 64% agree with that, 36% neutral or disagree, and again, the board level is much higher. So the board level respondents in this survey are more likely to agree with that statement than not. So there is a definite levelling of playing fields, which is, is it good news or bad news? Perhaps we can discuss that in our panel. And the final point is, just here, I would like suppliers to treat me more as a person rather than a potential sale. So when we've gone through our segmentations and our understanding and our analysis, what we also tend to forget is we're actually communicating with like regular people actually, rather than automatons. And that's definitely, resonates with the sample, even more so with board level here. So fundamentally, you can't connect with people as people without, before we get too kind of hearts and minds about this, but you can't connect with people as people unless you know who they are, right? So if you don't know your prospect base and your customer base, then this is going to be a challenge. You are going to treat them as a potential sale because you have no other option. So the point here is really not to say that, small is good and big is bad. That's ridiculous. But what we tend to find, because we have clients who operate in both of those spaces, is that the challenge is with big companies, everyone thinks they know me, but I'm really complex. They know me for X, but we do, Y and Z as well. And how do we communicate that when, we're just understood to be a kind of a one-trick pony, perhaps? And also, I'm very complicated. It takes ages for me to get things done. It takes ages for me to affect change in my organisation. And so I get outmaneuvered in some fashion. The challenge for the small guys is, no one knows me, but I'm really easy to know. So they just need, obviously, to amplify what they do in some fashion. And that's, never done by outspending the competition in our experience. But, there are obviously approaches to reconciling that problem. But definitely from a buyer point of view, they're seeing much less of this because what's presented to them is a website, is an event, is an engagement that, levels the playing field. So, back to Yoda. Why Yoda came into this presentation is simple. So if we imagine that our premise here is that time is getting shorter. Can anyone remember what the other ones were? Shall I ask anyone? Tom? No, I wouldn't do it. So time is getting shorter, formats are getting smaller. Decision-making process is getting longer, and appetite is increasing. Okay, so if we were to invert that, I asked you to do that. No. So imagine that was just the opposite. Imagine the world that we live in is actually back to front. What would you do as a marketer if there was exponential time, huge formats, very little time to get people convinced, and that they had very little attention span too? You would probably make blockbuster movies. Okay, you would all go back to your planning cycles for 2016 and make Accenture the film. Accenture return. In fact, you don't need to return. You're doing perfectly well. It would be a huge scale thing. It would be a huge amount of effort we'd put into it, and we would all become mini Steven Spielbergs. So kind of what we need to do, if we think that the actual trends are the opposite of that, is think in the opposite way, right? So what we need is anything but blockbuster movies, anything but long, grand gestures, because we're now trying to market to people in a much more kind of sensitive and considered way. It's really interesting, in fact, just using Master Yoda one more time. You'll probably be aware that there is a Star Wars movie out at the end of the year. Does everyone, hands up if you're aware of the fact there is a Star Wars movie out at the end of the year. Hands up if you saw the first one when it first came out. Okay. Thinner group. So that's what's fascinating about that. I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, but what's fascinating about that is I can remember the first snippet of that film being shared in social media in December 2014 for a film that was coming out in December 2015, okay, 1 year before. And that piece of information was 31 seconds long, and I saw it on my mobile phone. Okay. It's almost as if the geniuses at Hollywood have figured out that time is shorter, that formats are smaller, that decision-making cycles are quite long, and that the appetite for content has really gone up, you know. So maybe that seeds some ideas as to where, you know, everything's going from a content perspective and how we should start thinking about our audiences. So in summary, this pinch point, let's get to some kind of recommendations from this, and then we'll look at our panel contributing to it. So, time is shorter, appetite stronger, cycles are longer, formats are smaller. You're going to be saying that in your sleep tonight. I've been saying it in my sleep for the last 2 nights, so I'm only passing it on. What does that mean? What should we do about it? Well, the first thing is you need to know your customer. Okay, so the kind of customer knowledge is becoming increasingly important, and in our experience, B2B buyers are becoming much more interested in that, becoming much more interested in trying to understand that. So I don't think that's new, but it's very important to remind people of. And you know, we are hell bent on making it a critical part of our campaigns and our services. Engage across the journey. So there's a sales journey. Okay, you just need to know that sales journey. Who thinks it would be better, or they could improve the way they understand their customer journey, maybe get a bit close to sales, know what's going on at the deal end of their businesses? Do you think that would be of benefit to you as a marketer? Okay, so we've got to figure out how to do that. Be clear and be quick, and you know, big ideas and little pictures. Going back to the Star Wars clip. Things are becoming atomized, but once they're atomized, which is a very simple formula, of course, you know, you just turn a 1-minute thing into a 30-minute thing, or a 10-page thing into a 5-page thing. But actually, it's really tricky too, because you can't dumb it down, and it's got to have some sort of continuity to it as well. And that's, I think, where a lot of people default to what they know, default to, you know, what's expected of them from the wider organisation, as well about how you kind of go to market. Perhaps one of the most important things here on the top right is set the context. So we'll all be familiar with the notion of a sales funnel. Really, what a big part of our business is communications and PR. What that does is it sets the context for a buying process. And what happens at the top of the funnel? Of course, it's kind of a bit further away from us, and it's a bit harder to measure, and it's not really about sales, and a lot of the organisations don't get really excited about that. But that is critical, because if you set the right context there, then the rest of the process is going to be more effective. And if those decision-making processes are longer, without that right context and without that, you know, constant reminder of who you are and what you do, people are going to forget you. And of course, it has to connect to sales. There has to be a commercial, you know, a commercial direction for the things that we do in the process of onboarding new customers. Channels and formats are fascinating. I never thought I'd say that. I'm not really a channels and formats person. But what we realise now is that rather than just thinking about mobile first, you know, if you're talking about small formats, it can really change how you market. So the devices people are consuming information on are starting to inform how you communicate with them, and that is actually something of a first, I think. You know, definitely in the last cycle of, you know, business cycle, and also things like SEO. Okay, so SEO might define the words you put on your website. So rather than just being, you know, wonderfully communicative, you might be having to talk in a very specific way in order to make sure that your presence is there. These are very new skills and very new considerations for most businesses, and also, of course, play to your strengths. So before we try and boil the utopian ocean of excellence and walk out into 2016 with our hair on fire and doing wonderful things, you have to realise what you're really good at. Okay, small businesses are really good at doing things. Small businesses are doing, large businesses conversely. If you need to change that dynamic, of course, you need to figure out how. But fundamentally, you know, playing to your strengths gets things done, and we have to, and I think part of our job as an agency is make sure that everything that we suggest to businesses is grounded in practicality. You know, it's very easy to be inspirational, but there's normally a budget at the end as well that has to be met. So we really value that approach and think it's a really important point about the pinch point. Can I ask, does everyone understand the pinch point now? Is it okay? Do you want me to run through it again? No? Okay. Great. So on that note, I think I'll hand over to you, John.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Billy.